My name's Ian Priston, and my co-host today is Phil Salathé. Welcome, Phil.
Thanks, Ian. And we'd like to welcome Ed Paule, who we're very happy to have here to discuss the book. So shall we dive in? Well, first of all, welcome, Ed.
Oh, thank you. It's very, very glad to be here. Been looking forward to this for some time.
We've been planning it for a few months, haven't we? Mm-hmm. So, Ed, you've written a rather substantial book about Pink Floyd in 1967, which, as you said, I had the pleasure of reading your work in progress and your nearly finished version. I don't think I've seen the final version. Phil's had a look as well. What inspired you, Ed, to focus on 1967 in such detail? What was it about that year?
Well, the story behind that basically goes to when I started collecting Pink Floyd paperware. Like I had been collecting all their music or in their videos, but when I started collecting paperwork, it was an area that many others hadn't really delved into very deeply. So I found a little niche that I could contribute to the Floyd community by getting into this area. But in my childhood, I was a stamp collector, still am to some degree, but my past experience with collecting had taught me that when I decided to start collecting Pink Floyd paperwork, that collecting all of Pink Floyd's paperwork was going to be way too daunting, an impossible task. I don't know how Glenn Povey does it. So just from the get-go, I only collected the pre-Darkside years. So from 65 to 72 is the area that I concentrated collecting. And after a few years of collecting that whole area, it was obvious that 67 was the special year. That was the year that they had the most pictures, you had the most gigs, you had the most press release. That was them just starting out on their careers as professionals, and they were saying yes to every single time somebody said, can we do some publicity photos? Can we do an interview? Can we do this, that, and the other thing? Because later, once they had made it, they kind of went into seclusion and started saying no to all those requests for interviews. And there's less material out there in the documentation-wise. So that's why 67.
You didn't feel like slipping into 68 at all. 67 was enough. I think it was enough, seeing the detail of what you produced.
Like I said, I have collected 65 through 72, but the quantity of material I have is less from those years because a lot of the material I have was purchased on eBay, and when I see something from 67, I bid higher. Yes. Something from 68, I would still bid a fair amount, but I would get outbid and therefore not acquire the item.
So eBay is your friend?
eBay has been my friend, yes.
Mm-hmm. And also, it seems to me that, as I read through the book, one of the most important pieces is also the correspondence that you've carried on with various folks. A couple of things that Joe Boyd said, I think, were particularly striking. So I think that deserves to be mentioned alongside the print materials too, is that there's some conversations that shed new light on things with the primary sources themselves.
Oh yes. When I started this, it was merely collecting the paperwork, gathering the information. When you saw something new that wasn't in the collective Floydian known universe, I would dig deeper into it, write an article about it. And at the time I was, for a number of years, I was on the staff of the Spare Bricks webzine, if you're familiar with that.
Still find that online, can't you?
Oh, yes.
There's an archive of all the back issues online still. It still can be found out there, yes.
Worth checking out.
Yeah, was that Rick Carhu? Was he one of the main people behind that?
Rick Carhu was in there. Mike McInnes was the editor. He's the one who had recruited me. He had recruited me from seeing me make posts about things on the Echoes mailing list back in the day.
Let's talk a little bit about some of those quotes that are in your book, Ed, because some of them are very descriptive, very quirky. They're very of their time, I often find. Journalism was very different in 1967 to 2025. I think we can all agree that. Do you have any favourites that you encountered?
Quotes that come to mind now would be the ones that were more humorous in nature that the band was making. And the one question that they would constantly get by the press was, where'd you come up with this name Pink Floyd from? And I'm sure the first few times out they would answer it, but it got to be repetitive and old, and they couldn't stand answering that question anymore, so they would then start joking about in that radio interview they did, that Roger Waters did in Sweden after their performance at the Golden Circle. He right at the get-go, the Swedish interviewer asks him, "Where'd you get this wonderful name, Pink Floyd?" And Roger's like, that's nothing. It's just a registration mark. It's better than calling ourselves CCE338 or something. So now the first time you hear that, is he being legit with that? Or he being sarcastic with that? What's he doing? He kind of says it with a straight line. But it's clearly he's having a joke. Although there's a hint of truth to it, right? But I guess my favorite quote along that line comes from a student newspaper at the University of Leicester, the Ripple.
Yeah, I like that one too. That Leicester University interview is really it feels very honest and very sort of revealing. The one that's mostly with Nick, and then Roger comes in at the end, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yes, very long interview with Nick, back and forth, very honest, everything's great. But at the very end of the interview, Roger must have entered the area where they were doing the interview, and Nick's like, "Oh, here comes Raj, he's in our band," and Raj's like, no, don't call me Raj, call me Superman. And then Nick deadpanly asks Roger, Superman, where'd you come up with this wonderful name, Pink Floyd? And then Roger just groans. I can't even joke about it anymore.
Yeah.
And that's where the interview ends, on that line, and I love that one.
That's a great one, and it also sort of segues into something else that's been on my mind too, which is a pretty strong theory about the origins of another kind of quasi superhero name for the band, namely Vegetable Man. Right? It's interesting how you trace a line from that one comment about if you stop thinking you might turn into a vegetable, and then the same person is some weeks later, I think, referring to Syd Barrett as AKA Vegetable Man.
That would be Debbie Smith, the U.S. correspondent, talking with Syd, and being a vegetable. She calls him, "You might as well be a vegetable," as a response to something that Syd had said. I can't recall it at the moment. And then Syd's like, "Yeah," he like lights up and says, "Yeah," and it kind of must have stuck in his head.
It must have done. I've seen some online excitement about this very topic this week, with people saying, "Oh my goodness, that must be where the name of the song came from." And I thought, hang on a minute, I read this in Ed's book a very long time ago now.
Yeah, but that through line is pretty convincing, I have to say. It's that middle step where she refers to him as AKA Vegetable Man. Okay, this is really pretty close to a smoking gun here for sure. So that was neat. Another thing, by the way, just parenthetically, that sort of passed without comment. I think one of the things that, you know, that I love a mystery. I think we all do. All three of us do. But one of the mysteries that I was reminded of that passes without comment early on is a set list. Let me actually find the right page, but it has a title that I think will be completely unknown to anybody but a very few Pink Floyd fans, namely the song "Stoolfix."
Oh, yes.
So I think this is well. First of all, I know what I think, but Ed, did you have any thoughts about that, or did you kind of raise an eyebrow at that, you know, a la Leonard Nimoy, and then keep moving, or?
Well, I had my doubts when I first saw that. I was like, this is some sort of error in translation. But none of the other stuff around it was error translated. You know, did they mishear something? Is this stool fix sound similar to some other song title that they may have misheard? And it was like, no. So yeah, eventually I came to the conclusion that stool fix is in the same category as flapdoodle dealing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a name of a song that was written down on a set list, yet there's no other information about it out there.
We were on 27th of January. I've just been looking it up. I heard you tapping there, Phil. Did you look it up?
Of course,
as well?
yeah. It's, I mean, think of this set list, right? Power Talk H, Stool Fix, Flaming, Butterfly, Chapter 24, and Take Up Thy Stethoscope and Walk. I mean, who would not want to be, you know, a fly on the wall for the whole thing there? Be magnificent. But yeah, I suspect it could be an improvisation, it could be a mishearing, it could be a joke. I think even within their own camp, actually, they would joke about song titles, but certainly both to audiences and to journalists, they would just make up something completely nonsensical on the spot. I mean, most famously, probably things like, you know, looking through the knotholes in Granny's wooden leg and all of that. So I think it might be a gag, but we found a couple of other song titles that turned out to have a story behind them. So I hope that we'll someday find out. But yeah, like you, I went through every phonetic combination when I found out about the Stoolfix thing. I tried to think of what set of sounds could come up with the sound of Stoolfix, and I couldn't come up with a single one that in any language would have been transliterated incorrectly.
We need the band to solve this
True.
mystery, don't we?
Yeah.
Phil and I are going to do an episode about a certain concert in 1970 where a member of the band helped us with a similar dilemma, but we won't spoil that one today by telling the story of that.
Yeah.
But January was very much a month of reports about the light show as much as the music. There seemed to be an awful lot of fascination with the light show amongst the journalists, I noticed. Then February becomes about the underground scene and them throwing themselves into it, and the sudden attention that comes with that. It's kind of like quite a fascinating journey that you see in those press reports, even in the early months when generally you'd think not much would be known because they were only just making their breakthrough at the time. But you seem to have found stuff, Ed, for just about every month. You dug deeply. How did you find these things? Did you simply keep searching the likes of eBay and working your contacts?
Well, those two go hand in hand. You know, the short answer to the question is it's a group effort. I, you know, acquired originals for things that I bought on eBay. I've gone to libraries and done research to pull out copies of things off of their microfilm archives. And so have others. There's other people out there like me that collect this stuff. And once I had accumulated a certain critical mass of having things, you know, you make contact with others that are similar interests that also have their cache of things that they have. And we would make contact and we would trade. So people like Elliot Taman, Rolf Ossenberg, Romain Ferré, and especially Glenn Povey, you know, I would send them my list of here's the things I have in my collection. They would send me their list of things that they have in their collection, and then we would trade scans of items to our mutual benefits.
But then you went a step further and gathered it all together for 1967 in a level of detail that nobody has attempted before.
I would think that I've got a little bit more in my collection than Glenn's got in his, but by far, it's pretty extensive.
It does strike me as being, I can't imagine who would be conducting any kind of research from now on involving the year 1967 in Pink Floyd's history who's not going to need to have this book, at hand. And I think something that you mentioned, and I think is very much worth reiterating, is one of the very important things that happens here is that you translate things from sources that are not in English. I think a lot of people quite wrongly stop when they reach a language barrier, which I think in 2025 especially, we can all hold our phone up to any source and get a rough translation. But I was fascinated to see that there are even Polish sources, something I would have never guessed would be in play for 1967, but actually a very thoughtful, I think it's a combination of a concert review and an interview. Sheffield, as I recall, comes up late in the book. And that's, for those who may not know, the Polish music scene is exceptional, actually. There's some incredible jazz musicians that come out of Poland. So it doesn't surprise me at all that there were, good listeners and people who knew good listeners back in England, as I think the deal was that the Polish correspondent knew somebody back in England who had attended the Sheffield show, and sort of between that plus an interview, they managed to put together, I think, 2 separate features. Am I recalling correctly?
Well, the background on that Polish piece, I had bought that magazine on eBay decades ago, and this is a time before Google Translate was a thing, and just so happened that a restaurant that I was a regular at for lunch, the waitress there was an immigrant from Poland. So I'd be there like maybe once a week for lunch, finish my lunch, and then she would help me translate one of the paragraphs in this article.
Hiring a consultant, one tip at a time.
And then, then she would get a little extra tip, right? And then the next week we do another paragraph, and the next week another. And after a couple of months, I had the whole article translated, and it was fascinating. I mean, half the article was, repeating stuff that we were already aware of about the band. But then there was this half that was, this Polish author in Poland talking about having received a letter from his friend who was currently touring England and had gone to Pink Floyd show at Sheffield, and then he provides to his friend in Poland this review, this detailed review of that show. 2 giant fans blowing confetti out onto the audience and stuff. It's like things that you never heard described in any other review, let alone this particular Sheffield concert nobody had ever reviewed it before.
I feel as though I can imagine, based on his description, I find it hard not to believe. He talks about a scratchy gibberish coming from the front, and something in his description makes me think, I wonder if they opened with Power Talk H. I wonder if they opened with Roger's vocalizations, and that's how they experience it. It's the song out of all of them that lines up best with that description, but it's very vivid. It's very vivid indeed.
Yes, I try my best to give the foreign press, the non-English press, is equal weight as with all the English material. This whole thing wouldn't have happened if it weren't for doing that. It's just that. If you go back to my early days in this, I had bought some issues of the Dutch music paper called Hitweek.
Oh, I've got one of those. Yes.
It's a very common paper. You can pick them up for just a couple bucks on eBay today, but just because the supply outweighs the demand. But there was an article back in March of '67, and I had gotten it, scanned it, sent it in an email to my friend Gerhard den Hollander, and asked him to translate it, send it back to me. I get it back. Wow. It's a whole huge review of the March 3rd EMI launch party at Manchester Square.
Ah.
When you looked at the English press, like Disc and Music Echo or Melody Maker may have had one sentence saying that this event had occurred and say nothing about it. People knew nothing about what had occurred there. There's tons of photographs. It was heavily photographed. And those photographs were originally all thought to have been from April 1st due to a mistake that Barry Miles made in his book, his otherwise awesome book. But yeah, there's a couple little mistakes in there, and that was one of them. For years, people thought that launch party was on April 1st. But then in 2007, Glenn Povey published his book Echoes, where he changed that date. He put in his book that it occurred on March 4th. I was like, well, that was closer, but the actual date was March 3rd, which I knew from having this Dutch newspaper translated.
Mm.
So I emailed that correction to Glenn, provided him the scan of that paper along with the translation that Gerhard had made, and he was like, wow, you're right. That is a mistake. I'll fix that the next time around. And I then proceeded to send him some additional corrections and items from my collection that would prove those needed correcting. And it was that which initiated my friendship with Glenn.
Yes.
And opened up his archive of all the material that he has, and we just started exchanging with each other scans of material that we each needed. And so when he did his updated version of Echoes, he called the ultimate reference. You'll see my name in the acknowledgments list for having my help, Tim, on that book. And now I get to return the favor, as Glenn is responsible for a bunch of the things that you'll see in my book.
And now it's your turn to step out of the shadows and say, here I am, and this is what I know. And I would imagine there's quite a lot of differences in your book to those that have preceded it. Would you agree with that?
Yes. I would like to say that I am providing some corrections to the canon that has been established over the decades with other people's books. Yes. I guess for examples.
I'm staying silent here like a journalist might, because I think our audience, who may well hear this shortly before your book is published, might be thinking, well, what?
Well, I guess one of the main things would be the gig list. I know there's various websites where you can go and you can just see the long list of here's where the date and place that Floyd played, plus who were the supporting acts, all nicely listed. And other people made changes to that list. For example, in February there was a pair of gigs at the Ricky Tick, one in Windsor and one in Hounslow. And in the ultimate reference, Glenn deleted those. He said that they were canceled and postponed till March. Well, I found primary documentation that shows that both of those February gigs did in fact happen, and they need to be added back into the list that people are carrying. Then there's gigs like the first one in Ireland after their trip to Denmark. So in the middle of September, there's a gig that the lists all say it happened, but in reality it didn't happen. They were late. Well, they were half late. The band arrived in time in their vehicle, but the other vehicle carrying all their gear missed the ferry and wasn't able to arrive. So they weren't able to do their show that first night. on their Irish tour.
There are a lot of ferries in your book. I've noticed. It does come up a lot. It's like this ferry ride can take. It's great detective work. Anybody who's read my book with Ian knows we do the same kind of stuff. It's like, okay, if we want to figure out the answer to a question, let's look at the logistics involved and what would be. But it's fascinating to read. Okay, this ferry would have taken this amount of time with this amount of driving, and when you go through that process to try to figure out how did the band get from point A to point B, and what was realistic under the circumstances. Things like ferry timetables actually really nail it down, because some things are just impossible, physically impossible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they overstretched themselves massively, didn't they, that year with their travels?
Indeed. And so I think the saving the best for last on the changes to the gig list is a new one. A particular date, place that nobody had ever listed before. And it's all thanks to my conversation with photographer Paul Berriff.
Right.
He has a couple of photos that are well known of the band in the recording studio at Abbey Road. There's one with the band looking like it's a three-piece with Rick holding his cello in the center.
That's a beautiful picture, that one, isn't it?
Yes. So yeah, I had some very nice long email conversations with Paul, getting back into his history, about, how did he get invited into the studio for that? And he tells the story of how back in, it was all from a show in Leeds. And says, well, there was a show in Leeds at, was it Queen's Hall, or I forget. And then Paul was like, no, that's not where it was at. That's a big, huge venue, very high ceilings. Where I saw him was at the University of Leeds. It was a small venue, low ceilings. And so when he first told me that he had seen him at the University of Leeds, I was like, that's not on the list. Your memory must be mistaken. You must have been somewhere else. So we went down, the two of us, going over the dozen other venues that they were known to have played at that would have been in his area that he could have seen him at, and one by one we ruled them all out. And then I started digging into the university's records and found that on that date that he said that he had seen him there was indeed concert there. It was Jimmy James and the Vagabonds, was it?
Mm-hmm.
I forget.
The Outer Limits, was that the other?
And so the ads for the hop at the university were there, and just saying, and other supporting acts.
Mm-hmm.
And basically Paul provided proof that Pink Floyd was one of those supporting acts.
And you've included that in your book.
So that's now in the book. And Paul talks about how he and his partner, Stephen, right, was it? I forget, who was his, the two of them did articles for the Yorkshire Evening Press.
Is that Stephen Phillips, by the way? Am I correct?
Phillips, right. Stephen Phillips, yes. Yeah, Stephen did the writing, Paul took the pictures, and they were covering the music scene for the Yorkshire Evening Press. And they used their press credentials to get backstage and talk with the band. And so they spoke with Roger, and Roger invited them to come to the studio in London and see them. And they also had invited Roger to come to their offices for the newspaper to do a proper interview.
Mm.
And so when Roger came on the next day, the morning following, he parked his white Super 7 on the street out front, and Paul took a picture of that. You'll see that
with
picture
Roger in
the
the car.
Yes.
Yes.
That's a previously unpublished photograph that Paul was kind enough to give to me.
Is he wearing spectacles in that one, or of some kind? Do I remember correctly? I have an image of Roger in a car. Let me see if I can. Well, I'll find it in any event.
He looks very cool. It's a great shot in the book, that one. That car pops up quite a lot as well, doesn't it? That year.
Yeah, it shows up later in the year at outside with the Maida Vale Studios.
I know, that's the one I like.
He is
it's
indeed
got the BBC connection.
Oh, yeah. And he is indeed bespectacled, by the way. I knew I had a picture of Roger with a pair of these.
So Stephen's article that was based off of information that he gathered at that interview in February, plus his visit to the studio in March, wouldn't get published until July, because they were told that the album was going to be released that summer, so they were kind of waiting for that publishing until later. But there's information in Stephen's articles that were like, there's about what was on the album, things that he wouldn't have known unless he had heard it there in the studio that day, which helps identify the date on when those pictures of Paul's were taken. So the detective work.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, for Ian and me, when we wrote our book, we solved a lot of mysteries, and there are still, I think, a few that probably bother us a little bit at the back of our minds. Things like, how did the stereotape of 1971 get to Alison Steele, things like that. Were there any mysteries that or things just out of reach that you feel like after the book you wish you had been able to either get your hands on in terms of a physical item that exists but can't access, or in terms of a piece of information or a mystery you haven't solved? Is there anything that you wish, just one more clue from Sherlock Holmes, so to speak?
Well, I was prepared to talk about the opposite side of that. Mysteries that I did happen to get those little nuggets and do the detective work and solve.
I'm all for that too.
Which ones that are still out there waiting to be solved? Yeah, there's still some of those, like those pictures in that German magazine that David Parker originally published them in his Random Precision book.
Oh, yes. They're beauties, aren't they?
They're beautiful pictures of them playing live, and the caption in David's book erroneously calls it Tiles Club, but it's clearly not the Tiles Club, having seen what the Tile Club looks like, But finding which venue it really was, that's still a mystery. I've tried to collect as many pictures, time period pictures from the 60s of venues that they had played at, and haven't found a match yet.
For the benefit of listeners, Ed, where you don't know the answer in the book for something like that, how do you deal with it?
Well, the book, I try to, I'll state things as fact, as things that I'm confident are factual. If I'm hypothesizing or speculating about something, I'll be saying that. So you should know when reading it if it's something me just making an educated guess about something, or if it's factual.
Would you like to talk a little bit about Matilda Mother as well, since I know that was on our agenda as well?
Yes, that's one of those mysteries. A self-inflicted mystery, I guess. A mystery that many people may not even know there is a mystery associated with it.
What is the mystery of Matilda Mother?
Well, I guess it comes down to looking at the timing on each of the tracks, the different takes, as it went through its evolution. I mean, everybody knows about how it was originally Hilaire Berloc based lyrics, and that the Belloc estate wouldn't provide the band with the permission to use those lyrics in the song, so Syd had to change them.
Speaking as a composer, by the way, that's not at all unusual. I've known so many composers who I've known at least one composer who unwisely decided to take a poet's lyrics in hand, set them to music, and then was quite immediately shot down by the poet's estate. A lot of work for nothing. So that's not uncommon at all.
Right. So there's an essay in the book that talks about that evolution from full Belloc lyrics in a live recording from UFO in January to when they first recorded it at Abbey Road in February, where the lyrics were half Syd and still half Belloc, to then when it got fully changed later. So the recording times show that the February take that they used was 3 minutes 55 seconds long, with a note on the tape box to say, fade this out. There's a lot of extra noodling at the end. That version is available on the 40th anniversary edition of Piper. You can hear that original take of Matilda Mother with half Belloc, half Syd lyrics. That's 3 minutes 55. But in June, when Syd went in and to re-record the lyrics so that it was now all his and no Hello Belloc, that take was 3 minutes 15 seconds. They had cut 40 seconds off the end. They faded it out like the instructions had said to do. But the final released version was only 3 minutes 4 seconds long. There was 11 seconds lost. And David Parker discusses that in his book. He talks about how that tape was physically cut with scissors and a section removed and then glued back together. And you can hear that little sonic pop where the two pieces of tape are glued together.
It's not at all a subtle edit, is it? It's quite like clunk. You can hear the two. Yeah.
So yeah, I went into Cool Edit, put it in spectral view, and I went detective workings looking for, where's that 11 seconds? And yes, it's that 11 seconds directly before where that tape splice is in the final. So where the original, had that chorus from Belloc of, finding she was left alone with tiptoe to the telephone. And then there's the 999, kind of a break in the flow of the meter of the song. And that was what they had cut out. And so having found that was where it was cut out, it then led to the next idea was sunshine. That mystery of sunshine. At the same time at that splice occurs, you have the main lyric in one channel, if you're listening to the stereo version, and then you have Syd singing sunshine, a very long extended sing of that word in the other channel. So in order to have both lyrics at the same time and separated in stereo like that, they had to be on separate tracks on the multi-track tape when they were mixing it. And so where, the question had always been, the mystery had been, what was that sunshine? Where did that come from? And my speculation was that 11 seconds that preceded it has more Syd lyrics. And that sunshine was just the last word of the last couplet in that lyric that was put on the cutting room floor when they cut it out.
And do you think it goes? They would have gone from singing "ah" to some lyrics that we've lost, and then "sunshine." Was that the thinking?
That's the speculation. Yes. Now, to the best of my knowledge, the original multi-track tape that would have the 3 minute 15-second version is gone. But the tape that had the mix downs does exist. And that they had done 3 takes on that mix, and that it was the third mix that they considered best, and they cut the 11 seconds out to make the final.
Mm-hmm.
But the other two mixes are still in the vault, would still have the lyrics, if there are any, prior to him singing Sunshine.
Mm-hmm. So I have a.
So
go on.
I contacted Ian Barrett, Syd's nephew, about it, who runs his online presence. And I said, there's this potential for some long lost missing Syd lyrics to be in the vault. Does could we ask Pink Floyd's management if they could look into that?
Mm-hmm.
So we contacted Paul Losby and posed that question to him. My instincts had told me that David Gilmour has everything. He's got a copy of everything that was ever in EMI's tapes. So that just like Bob Dylan Blues, he's got that tape somewhere. That just hasn't been released yet as a bonus track on anything. But Paul asked, and then Paul got back to me, and he's like, no. Now we don't. There's never been a digital transfer of that tape. So I was like, well, sounds like something for Sony to do now that they own this. Pull that tape out, look at those first two mixes, and see what's on those missing 11 seconds, and hopefully we'll see that someday as a future bonus track.
What was his reaction? Sorry, I know you want to come in, Phil, but I'm always quite curious about reactions. What did Paul say to that? Did he say, "Yeah, we'll do it," or was that the end of that?
His reaction was, "It's not likely that Sony would be doing anything like that." I believe I don't know his exact words, but the rationale would be monetary. The expense of doing it would be more than the benefit from selling it after it was done.
I disagree. I want to hear it.
I know. I disagree as well.
Yeah.
Hopefully there's some other goodies in there too that would make it worthwhile.
Well, we need to find a very well placed television producer with a very successful series who insists that they must have that take and that only, so that they can license it for the streaming rights, and then they'll pay attention. Oh, geez. So I have a theory, and because you raising this question, in our preparation for this episode made me. So I went and listened to some isolations of the vocals from that people have done. What if it's not Sunshine that they're singing? I know it sounds a lot like it, but when I listen to these isolated vocals, only one person. There are two people singing. I assume it's Syd and Rick, right? It would probably likely be the two of them. One of them doesn't terminate with an I sound at all in his vocals. It sounds more like an ah sound, a very broad kind of open sound that doesn't sound at all like the other person does sound like he's singing something closer to an ein, but the harmony vocal is more of an ah. And I also noticed that it's kind of more of a ch sound than a sh sound. I realize we're getting deep into anorak territory.
Yeah.
But of course, if you're listening to this podcast and you don't consider yourself exactly,
I'm with you. You have my full attention.
Yeah. So don't get me wrong. I think probably the odds are that it is Sunshine, but it sounded enough not like it to me to make me wonder whether there's something involving a ch sound that might be illuminating. Now, does that mean that Syd kept something from Belloc? Probably not. Although, by the way, I loved your thought. I think I'm recalling correctly that you sort of hypothesized that Matilda was inherited, obviously, from the prior versions of the lyrics and from Belloc, and the mother was kind of a emendation to bring it into the world of Mother Goose. Is that what? Do I recall correctly? That was your sort of original research idea?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Matilda comes from the poem that Belloc had written that Syd borrowed some lyrics from. Mm-hmm. Although that name is not said in the song at all,
right,
but just in the title. And the mother half, it's nursery rhyme, fairy tale. It's Mother Goose type stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think, listening to it, I can see. I mean, of course, we have so many cues to think of why it would be Sunshine. They talk about sunlight earlier. They talk about later, rather. They talk about shining earlier, so that those words are kind of around. But it did make me wonder when I listened to it. I said, this sounds more like something cha or something. I don't know. I very well could be wrong, but I wanted to advance the possibility just in case it opens up some new frontier in research. Because if it isn't sunshine, they're saying that's something else, then maybe we can connect the dots with something, some other something or other that we've otherwise overlooked. Speaking of lyrics, by the way, another area of inquiry for you in the book was into set the controls, right? Which has sort of been an ongoing thing for, I think, for some time to try to get those sort of nailed down and figure out. I think we'd love to have a line. Well, first of all, why don't I let you set the stage for it about like why the lyrics for set the controls are sort of an issue of interest for us.
Yes, set the controls lyrics are derived from Chinese poetry, old Chinese poetry from the late Tang Dynasty, and many of them, maybe about 60% of the couplets in the song have been identified what their original sources were.
Do you remember
the rest of them? I haven't been able to locate. There may be Roger originals, just in that vein.
Were you on Echoes when that ball got rolling? I think I know who sort of first cracked the beginnings of that case that you and I, among other folks, had built on. But I believe, I want to say it was 1997, that Johan Lif, a Swedish journalist and all-around cool guy, I think he sort of was the first person to crack the case on sources, and then we've taken it from there. By the way, I also mentioned him because sadly he just passed away of aggressive brain cancer. He lived a lot longer than most people do who have it, but ultimately it cost him his life.
I think I came to the table on that later. My original trying to spelunk into the lyrical backgrounds was trying to get to the bottom of Octopus and all of the sources that Syd had used to come up with the lyrics for that cut up song.
Yes. Yeah, that's a wild one.
So we should explain to listeners in case they're wondering, because obviously your book, Ed, is a month by month chronicle of the breakthrough year, but you split that up, don't you? There are a series of essays throughout the book.
Each chapter is a month, so there's 12 chapters, and it's day by day through each of those chapters. And I just had the feeling that would be kind of dry reading to have that all the way through the whole book, And so I decided at the beginning that I wanted to put essays in between each chapter to give a change of pace in the reading. And it wasn't copying off of you guys, but when I saw what you two of you had done on your BBC radio book, how Phil put the commentary on the music in between.
Phil's the blue pages. Yes.
I was like, yeah, that's brilliant. I'm looking to do something similar in that vein.
And then you end up with 2 books, was our theory.
For the price
of one. Of
course,
Phil,
yeah.
you contributed to what was, in inverted commas, my half quite substantially as well. But you can read it separately. And I found it, Ed, that I could do the same with your text as well. You can whiz through all of the days and all of the months, and you pick up the themes, and then you can go back through and read the essays. And that was my favourite way of reading your book second or third time round.
Good. Glad to hear it. Yeah, I hadn't expected that. Now,
speaking of the experience of reading through the book, one thing I noticed is around the time that Syd, had his incident in July at the BBC, and then the alleged breakdown. I sort of found myself noticing it's interesting that the knives really start to come out in the press about then, where in particular I began noticing that there are more negative comments from fellow musicians in the sort of the stretch after that. And of course, one that immediately jumped out to me was seeing Andy Summers, soon to be the guitarist for one of the most famous trios in the entire world, namely the Police. At that time he was associated with, I think it was Dantalian's Chariot. but talking about how he
Right.
didn't think too much of Pink Floyd and how he'd rather play with, or he prefers the Soft Machine, whom he ended up joining about 2 years later. And then also there was a comment from Arthur Brown. He called them something like impersonal and overpowering. But it's interesting. I found myself wondering, did people smell blood in the water? Were they, were they sort of saying, okay, now this thing is blowing over. We've got the chance to get our shots in and take, it's interesting how people sort of, when a group begins getting bad press, suddenly it seems to kind of escalate very rapidly.
I agree with you, Phil. And I think it actually happened slightly earlier than that. I think it was in June. It was at that point that the press seems to start picking apart their performances in a way that it hadn't done before. It was as though the honeymoon period was beginning to be over. So there was praise, but they were quite happy to be critical as well. And what that made me think was, what impact did that have on the band?
Good question. What impacted the press? What did they read? How often did the band read what was in the press? Don't know.
I mean, the big question, perhaps too big a question for this conversation, is how did that impact Syd's confidence?
Oh,
and that takes us back to
my
Rosemary.
recollection is, I think the complaints about the band were constant throughout. I mean, their March Eel Pie Island gig, the review is crap any amateurs could do. It was terrible. Yeah, there's lots of negative reviews. I think maybe earlier on in the year, there was a lot of the focus on the psychedelic sensation.
It was about lights and experimentation earlier in the year, but the tone starts to change. And then it flips.
The original tone it's like it's all drug music. It's all LSD simulation stuff that they're doing. And the band would constantly deny it in the press. No, we're not. It's not drug music. We just combine music and light in an interesting way.
Yeah, I remember being struck when you had that interview with Nick Mason at Leicester University, how he sort of, you can tell he's handled this question about 20 times, but he tries to do as deftly as he can, essentially saying, look, that's not what we're not trying to send anybody on a drug trip. But of course, if people say that they experience it that way, then, he tries to navigate it as deftly as he can, but I feel that you can sort of sense not the fatigue, but the fact that issue just keeps coming up for them over and over again.
Yeah.
By the way, before I forget, I loved the little parenthetical bit. This is something that I would never, ever know about on this side of the Atlantic, that News of the World, when they began to have bad press or otherwise talk about things going on, that it was a particularly acute issue because it was the preferred newspaper of policemen. I had no idea about that.
Yes, that was some brilliant insights from my conversation with Joe Boyd. And about the shutting down of UFO on Tottenham Court Road and the shift over to the Roundhouse. That News of the World piece that talked about it in a very negative light, being forced the owner to kick him out of that club space, the Blarney Club underneath the cinema.
It made it sound as if you were seeing scenes that hadn't been seen since the reign of Caligula, so to speak.
So Joe Boyd assisted you. Who else assisted you, Ed?
Oh boy, I have a number of quotes in the book from people that were witness to these events in '67. Some of them go back 20 years ago when I was first talking to people, mostly photographers. I had long conversations with Vic Singh.
I was going to mention Vic because you got a great picture of his on the cover.
Yes, there is a great story behind that pic. If we have time to go into all that, Vic had the one picture when you went to his website to buy a nice big print, he was selling them. He had lost all of his others. He had kept them at his home. He moved out, and then when his mom moved, that box with all his pictures got lost. Mom probably inadvertently tossed it. So he just had the one picture, and I had found in a magazine from September, the Rave, they had a full-page photograph, an outtake from that session, and Vic was unaware of its existence. So I mailed him my copy of the magazine so that he could, with his equipment, take a super high resolution scan of it. And then he spent however much time in Photoshop, fixing it up, and he turned it into this beautiful item, and he now sold 2 pictures on his website.
Ah.
And so at that time, a long time ago, I said, I have thoughts of writing a book, about 67. I would, love to include that picture and put it on the cover. And he was like, sure, great, no problem. Here you go. He sent me a CD with the high-res image on it and permission to use it.
Fabulous.
Then there's other photographers like Fiona Adams, who's unfortunately no longer with us. I had nice long conversations with her, and quotes from her are in the book about her photo session that she did for Fabulous 208. Now, we already talked about my conversation with Paul Berriff. I'm sure there's others I can't think of right now.
Yeah, but it's a story of cooperation, isn't it? I'm thinking about the themes of this conversation now. You've cooperated with lots of researchers, had conversations with Paul Lowsby, which is a rare thing indeed. I don't think we've had any guests on the series so far who've had that opportunity. And I suppose that's what helps pull this together in the way that you have. And then you needed to find yourself a publisher. What was that journey like?
The obvious choice was to get Charles Beterams involved, who had done your wonderful book, and the Nico van der Stam Archives book that I enjoyed so much, and he seemed to be the perfect choice. And so when I pitched the idea to him, his first response was basically, it's not going to sell. We're not going to sell enough copies to make back, my money, let alone make a profit. So we'll pass on that. So I said, okay, thanks for, listening and giving me the chance. And I went to try and start beating the bushes with other publishers around. And that was pretty futile. Eventually I came back to Charles and said, can you give me another chance? Can you rethink your thoughts? And then I had been talking with you, Ian, about it, and it was a comment that you made that I believe tipped the scale.
Oh, what did I say?
I believe the quote would be, the Pink Floyd community needs this book.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's true. Yes.
And then Charles agreed that the community needed this book, and whether or not he made any money off of it was irrelevant.
Yeah. Charles has got a very generous spirit and works very hard on all of the publications that he produces, and most certainly has become the best person to go to.
Yes,
I think I had confidence in your book from the outset. Perhaps I got that across to Charles a little bit better second time round as well. But now it's there. It's almost for sale. Today's the 16th of August. What date does it hit the streets? Is there a precise date?
No, there's not a precise date. Charles has bought a new house. He's in the process of moving. So the book has been printed. He's collected the copies, but the actual distribution of it is going to be in September sometime. Great. After things settle down with his relocation.
And there were different versions of the book available.
Yes, there's the book itself is it's the same book in either version. The signature edition just has some extras in there, and the main extra is a catalog.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's a copy of my list of what I've got in my collection. All the newspapers, magazines, all the different things, the date, page number if known, what where you can find all these things. So it would be a little bit of a guide for fellow collectors like me that want to collect these sorts of things. The original intention was to have that as an appendix in the book. But as we were putting the book together and Charles was laying out the design, by the time we got to about October, it became apparent that we weren't going to have room.
It's quite a heavy book.
It's a big book. It's a heavy book. It's 496 pages because printing a book requires the number of pages to be divisible by 8, as I guess they do 8 pages per sheet when they print it. And that the binding of the book, basically it needed to be under 500 pages for it to be bound as a single book. If we went over 500 pages, it was going to have to be split into 2 books, a 2-volume. And we didn't want to do that. So so that appendix became a separate book, and that is the bonus item you get in the signature edition.
Is that still available?
Amazingly, within hours of it going on pre-sale, the 50 signature editions were sold out. Very pleasantly surprised to have seen that happen.
So the really diligent fans were straight onto it. I don't believe there are plans for a reprint.
The book as it is now isn't going to be reprinted, right? If it gets reprinted, it would be an updated version that may be, a decade from now, because new material is going to be coming to light, all the time. There'll be things I'll find out that need fixing. Hopefully I'll get the date on when those German photographs, what venue that was. I'll get some more mysteries solved. New information will come to light, and maybe there'll be an updated version in the future, but this version is not going to be reprinted.
So there were 50 of the special edition. How many were there of the ordinary edition?
Well, there's a total of 500 printed.
Nice.
About 30 of those go to people that were significant contributors, such as yourself, Ian. You're getting a copy.
Jolly good.
When going about licensing pictures to put in the book, many of them wanted a monetary fee plus a copy of the book. So some copies of the book are being sent out to those licensees. So there's about 470 then total. You subtract 50 from that, leaves 420 that are on the regular edition sale.
And there's still some of those available?
Oh yeah. So, according to Charles, it's selling nicely, but there's still plenty available. It's not sold out.
And am I right in thinking that there's only one place to buy it, which is direct from Charles?
Correct. You have to go to Charles's floydstuff.com website to order it.
I'm given to understand that there's another book in the works, perhaps.
Well, the epilogue at the end of the book gives a teaser. There's a photograph there by Adam Ritchie from the October 15th International Times launch party of the band, and it's an image that's not in circulation anywhere. So it's another one of those unseen photos that I've got two dozen never been seen before pictures in the book, plus many more that haven't been seen since 1967 in their original publishing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm currently working on a prequel, the
Star Wars
66,
style.
66, 65, into 64, probably late 64 when the T-set, as the band was known at that point in time, kind of coalesced around the members that we know and love as the Pink Floyd members.
Mm-hmm.
So have you just told us that the book is 64 to 66, the prequel? Is it all one?
Yeah, it'll be all in one. The amount of material that exists for that time frame is significantly less than what was in the 67 time frame. Press was not writing stuff about them every day like did later.
You set yourself a challenge there, because where the 67 book takes you all around the world, you're just going to have to cover the UK and some France, I would imagine.
That depends on if the scope is just Pink Floyd and what they were doing, or if I'm going to also cover Joker's Wild and what they were doing, and any busking that they might have done around France. Mm-hmm. That scope hasn't been fully defined yet. So
you've not been put off by the experience?
No, it was wonderful.
Yes,
it was
you'd recommend
jolly good fun working on this book. I mean, it's my hobby. I'm not going to make any money off of this book. We need to sell a significant number of copies just to break even, and then the copies after that, that money goes into Charles's pocket for the publisher to make a little profit, and thus have the impetus to go ahead and do another one.
Yes.
And I suppose we should mention who wrote the foreword to the book, that being Ian Barrett, right? Who I think clearly thinks very highly of the work, and as we've seen, is very willing to give a platform to work that he thinks is truthful about his uncle's legacy.
Well, as the back cover on the book states, which is kind of what's copied onto Charles's website, basically, calls the book an unsanitized history of that. And that's what it is. It provides the good with the bad juxtaposed together for you the reader to come to their own opinions.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I think that's an excellent way to put it.
Yes.
There's unpredictability, there's incidents, there's highlights, lowlights, quite a bit ups and downs,
quite a bit of humor
throughout,
too.
Isn't there?
Quite a bit of humor. Yeah.
The book is intends to be complete, and talking about everything that happened, no matter how small. But in order to fit in the 500 pages, there were a few minor things that we had to cut, but it tried to be, all inclusive and talk about everything. But some things were just briefly talked about because those were things that I felt that my reader, the intended audience for the book, although any Floyd fan can hopefully get and love this book, the primary audience that I was writing to were the aficionado, the person who already has a couple of Pink Floyd books on their shelf and they're thirsty for more information. So things that I believe that they already are aware of because they've already read about it in other books that they've got, I'll summarize those items so that the book still has that completeness feel to it. But those items that I believe that would be new to them and thus more of interest to them, and more of interest to me as well, I'll delve into more detail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's a very important point too, is that, this book and, for instance, David Parker's book sit very well next to each other on the shelf. They're addressing different things about that period of time, and so having them both in hand is ideal.
Yes, David's books the Bible, love that book. I would not attempt to duplicate, what he's done in that book. So, although I do mention, all the recording sessions and what was recorded in each one, if I elaborate on one, it's because I believe I'm providing new information that wasn't in David's book.
So you can quite literally have the two of them open at once.
Yeah.
And then I think there's a third way with this, which is the most important thing to me, which is the dynamics in the band and the cracks and when they start to show. Because so many of the biographies, although some of them are excellent, obviously, and thoroughly enjoyable reads, you can't tell what happened when, and you can't tell what emphasis that biographer is giving particular events.
Oh, yes.
Whereas your book is verbatim, as it happened, without prejudice. It's dozens, if not hundreds of people writing from their perspectives of what they saw. So you get that objectivity.
And a point that complements that, by the way, Ian, is that as we read the book, we begin to notice how the band's own memory of the recent past begins to diverge from one another, where they give different answers to the same question, like what was your first time on TV, or what was your first professional gig? I'm thinking in 1967, they're already not agreeing with each other on those answers.
So Ian, you mentioned crack, and that's an important item. Most people will see the crack in the band, especially with Syd, happening in late July, August timeframe, when the Saturday Club performance went sideways, and the band had to take basically the whole month of August off to try and regain their sanity before starting back up again. But that crack in the band goes back further. There's in Hitweek again, in Dutch, that you had to get translated to English to know about it. The people from Hitweek had come over to London, attended the March 3rd launch party for Arnold Layne at Manchester Square. They also attended their gig at Eel Pie Island, and they also attended a rehearsal that they had done around that time, during which they did a bunch of interviewing. But initially, they I guess in that interview, Roger Waters mentions that the band had a row with Syd Barrett already. So here it is. Here it is, late February, early March, basically right around the time they signed their contract with EMI. There's a 3 versus 1 crack about the direction of where the band was heading. And my feeling as to what was going on was that Syd was, as his sister said, was in the band for the fun of it.
Yes.
The rest of them were in it to become rich and famous. So that signing of the contract with EMI I see as a bittersweet moment for Syd. It was sweet because he now had access to all the toys that Abbey Road had in that studio. That was going to be fun. He was going to enjoy playing with all those toys. He was going to enjoy making this record. But it also meant that he was now in the business, and the downside that being in the business, the baggage that comes with that he didn't want to be a part of. So again, it's just my feeling. I think that once July, August timeframe came around, once Piper was done, it hadn't been released yet, but as far as his work on it, it was done. He would have said to the band, all right, that was fun. Now let's go do something else. But the band was like, no, we're not going to go do something else. This is our career. We're doing this, and
we need you.
Yeah.
So whether consciously or unconsciously, there was some part of Syd that wanted out at that time.
So, Ed, compiling the book, what was the most difficult part from your perspective?
The hardest part, the most difficult, the most challenging bit was tracking down the copyright holders. Finding the photographers or the agency, whoever owned the copyright for these pictures that I wanted to include in the book. Wanted to pay the licensing fee to those people that deserved it. And as an example of that was trying to track down Baron Wolman. Now, Baron had taken a series of photos of them in San Francisco, Sausalito to be exact, during their trip to America. But Baron has unfortunately passed away. But his website was still out there. I went to his website. There was a contact me on there. You click on that, you send off a little email to whoever's running the site saying, I'm doing a book and I would like to license some of these pictures. And then 2 weeks go by and I don't hear anything. So I go back to the website and I read through the whole website. I find an alternate email address. Send the email off to that address. 2 weeks go by, nothing. So obviously not an active website, a zombie website sitting there. But the website also had a phone number on it. So in my final desperation, I called that phone number, left a message asking them to call me back about this. And amazingly, I did get a call back. It was not Baron Wolman or his estate or anybody that ran the website. It was the guy who bought Baron Wolman's house, which is what that phone number was for. And he's like, yeah, I didn't bother changing the landline phone number after buying the house, so I still have Baron's phone number. But he was aware of what was going on, and he informed me that all of Baron's pictures after he passed were donated to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio, and that I needed to go there to track this down. So a few emails with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I had a contact person who was working the Baron Wolman collection, and in short order, I had 8 contact sheets showing 72 photographs that Baron had taken of Pink Floyd that day in Sausalito.
Wow.
And I was like, whoa, I've maybe seen 30 of these. There's a whole bunch more that I hadn't seen. And I was like, gold, this is great. I'm not just going to license one of these pictures, I'm going to license 2 of these pictures. So I picked the 2 pictures out of the ones that never seen before, and they're in the book for you all to enjoy. And the one picture that was a must to me out of that was showing the 5-man Floyd. People are saying, what? 5-man Floyd? That ended when Bob Close left the band, right?
Yes.
Or that didn't start until David Gilmour joined the band. No. When you read the book and you see what the press was writing about the band in '67, they frequently referred to the lighting guy as a 5th member of the band. And the band members would agree that he was an integral part of the group, just wasn't getting paid. He was on salary,
Yes.
not getting a cut. But so yeah, there they are on the fire escape, the 4 Floyds plus Peter Wynne Wilson, front and center, shoulder to shoulder with the rest of them.
And is that the only five-man Floyd photograph?
Of that five-man, well, there's other ones like showing him further in the background, climbing out the window onto the fire escape.
But not in the foreground.
Not in the foreground like this one that you'll see in the book.
Yeah, he's right in the thick of it, and he really does look like a band member, not an auxiliary figure.
You must have considered that image for the front cover, but you had a brilliant one already.
Right. I had that one already taken care of. And like when you do these licensing deals, one of the things they ask is the picture going to be inside the book or is it going to be on the cover of the book? And if it's going to be on the cover, it's extra.
Yes.
You have to pay extra. Another thing in viewing these thumbnails that are watermarked by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, pictures of Baron Wolman, there's a couple of them where Syd's body is turned ever so slightly, and you can see a bit of the back of that white sweatshirt that he's wearing. Famous photograph of him sitting in the chair with that white photograph with the sugar cubes in his mouth, right?
Yeah.
So on the back is a logo that is identifiable, so you know where Syd got that sweatshirt. And when I was first thinking about how to publicize this book and do promotionals for this book, I thought about doing a trivia contest on a fleeting glimpse, putting out some really tough trivia,
yes.
Answers to which would be in the book. And and that question, that super tough trivia question would be, where did Syd get that sweatshirt that he's seeing in those pictures? What California attraction that Syd had visited, prior to doing this photo shoot, did he pick up that white sweatshirt? And the answer to that is the Cheetah Club down in L.A., Santa Monica, Venice. It's right on the border between Santa Monica and Venice. So there were rumors about Mandrax and that concert, that gig not going too well for Syd, but he seemed to have liked it enough to have picked up some merch on his way out.
It reminds me of the phrase, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, right? Quite literally.
One other thing that I would like to discuss was Top of the Pops. Another little mystery that had always bugged me. You had these three sets of pictures of them during rehearsals for Top of the Pops. When the footage of the first session from July 6th came to light, what was that, a decade ago? That identified that first set of pictures from being that first July 6th performance. But it was the other two from the 13th and the 27th that were, which one goes with which? Which set of pictures is which date? And with my penchant for OCD and on those details, it was wanting to figure that out. But really all you had to go on with those pictures was the length of their hair, Which one looks like they have an extra 2 weeks of growth on it, And in doing that, I had put the pictures with them sitting on the cushions as the 13th, and the pictures of them, standing in front of that big mirror disc as the 27th. But later, some eyewitness had said that, around that 27th, around that Saturday club that occurred on the following day, the 28th, was, Syd's quote, lost weekend, and Syd had been walking around barefoot and that his feet were bloody, and the reason why they were sitting on cushions was because he had these bloody feet. I'm not sure where that story came from. But after hearing that story, I was like, okay, eyewitness said that, all right, I believe it. And I switched those pictures so that the cushion shots were the last Top of the Pops episode, and the mirrored disc was the middle one.
Mm.
Well, in doing this research for this book, I was fortunate to get access to some of the documentation in the BBC archives. Very enlightening, the detail that the BBC went into documenting these Top of the Pops things. First off, news to me was that it was a 2-day event. You know, the show was broadcast live on Thursday evenings, and you knew that the band would have been there earlier in the day to rehearse, you know, when those pictures were taken. But the whole deal actually started on the Wednesday, the day before. They did camera rehearsals where the cameramen would rehearse how they were going to film the bands, you know, when they were going to do a close-up on who, and when they were going to pan around. And they created what they call a camera script of everything that they were going to do. And in order to do that on Wednesday, they brought in stand-ins to pretend to be the band members on the stage while they rehearsed what the cameramen were going to do. So the original Surrogate Band for Pink Floyd was Wednesday, July 5th, 1967.
Yeah.
But yes, the band would then come in on Thursday for the rehearsal, and the documentation would show which studio they would be on. Okay, so they had multiple stages there at Top of the Pops, you know, because they were going to be filming live. So when they finished filming one band doing their thing, you know, they would cut to the compere, you know, the DJ that was hosting it that evening to say a few words and segue into the next band, and then the cameraman would then go to that next band, and that would be on a different stage, you know. So they then had time to redress that first stage for a band that would then be coming on for later in the program. And so taking that tidbit of information along with some footage that still exists of the 27th episode, that final Top of the Pops episode, on which the documentation shows that Tom Jones, when he did his bit, was filmed on the same stage that Pink Floyd had done their bit earlier in the broadcast. So the footage of the Pink Floyd no longer exists, but the Tom Jones footage does exist. And so you can see Tom Jones on stage with the big mirror disc.
Ah. And the final
Thus,
piece
the
is in the
big mirror
jigsaw.
disc. So the finally was able to nail down positively when those pictures were taken. Syd and Roger sitting on cushions is from the 13th, not the 27th. That's them with the big mirror disc.
Remarkable piece of research. You must have been hugely satisfied when you got to the bottom of that.
Indeed, you know, solving a mystery or finding some new piece of information is what's the satisfying bits. Those are the joyful bits. That makes it all worthwhile. All the otherwise mundane flipping through pages and pages of material, you know, looking for something Floyd, and then when you do find something Floyd, then finding out, okay, that's nothing new. I already knew all that, you know. But yes, finding those tidbits of new information, solving those mysteries, yeah, that's gets the endorphins going. That's great stuff.
Well, that concludes this episode of the Fingal's Cave podcast. Our thanks once again to Ed Paule, who has written a really essential book that I and Ian both urge our listeners, if you have any interest in 1967 and in Pink Floyd's life, and if you don't, I have no idea why you're here, please do go out and purchase a copy at your earliest convenience, because it will answer so many questions you knew you had and some you didn't know you have. So on behalf of myself and Ian, thank you again, Ed. It's such a pleasure talking to you for the past couple hours.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for episode 31 of the Fingal's Cave podcast. As a kind of postscript, we had 3 things we wanted to mention. The first of which is to wish a fond farewell to our colleague, Nils Saintfinnick. Nils has chosen to step back for now, though we certainly hope to welcome him as a guest on a future podcast episode. So to Nils, wir wünschen dir alles Gute für deine zukünftigen Unternehmungen. Secondly, at one point in the podcast I mentioned the Swedish journalist Johan Lif. As far as I know, Johan was the first person to crack the case of the origin of Roger Waters' lyrics to set the controls for the Heart of the Sun. He was a longtime poster on the Echo's mailing list, and I enjoyed corresponding with him over the course of nearly 3 decades. Johan developed brain cancer several years ago, and though he outlived most predictions for his type of illness, I'm sad to report that he died earlier this year. He was a keen-eyed, detail-oriented, and highly intelligent researcher, much like our guest today, and so with that in mind, we thought it would be appropriate to dedicate this episode of the podcast to Johan and his memory. Finally, one more reminder that if you would like to purchase Ed Paule's excellent book, please direct your web browsers to floydstuff.com, where you may purchase it directly from the publisher, Charles Beterams, and the Be Smart Book Company. Thank you again for listening, and until the next episode.